Great to have you guys back. Welcome back to our Tech Chat podcast. Today, we want to follow up with a second episode on sustainability trends and developments in the East and West. And we are happy to have you on again, Tim, on the podcast.
Good to be back.
You're welcome.
Yeah, great. Yeah, I've seen, Tim, that you have been presenting a few months ago at the Hebei International Industrial Design Week, covering the circular economy. And I think it's especially interesting when sustainability is addressed within the Chinese market context, because China's role as the world's factory gives its actions considerable weight. Can you tell us what was the highlight of the event and what was the core message to your audience in Hebei?
Yeah, I mean, it was a really interesting event back at the end of September. So that was located in the Xiong'an New District, in between Beijing and Tianjin, which I think we touched on in our previous podcast, this sort of very big new newly built city in Hebei. Yeah, it's an interesting strategy from the Hebei provincial government to try and, I guess, transform their industry, because Hebei is very traditionally a sort of a manufacturing central in China. A lot of that heavy industry, sort of, steel production, coal production. This is part of an effort to try and sort of diversify a little bit away from that heavy industry moving forward into the future. So in this new area, they host the Hebei International Industrial Design Week, which I think was a really interesting mix because, certainly there's design events in Shanghai and Beijing, which is focused on, sort of very high-end luxury sort of consumer products. This one was a little bit different. A very interesting mix of sort of the larger state-owned enterprises. So, you might have the railway rolling stock manufacturer. They had a little booth there. Sort of those larger end companies sort of larger scale, right the way down to sort of smaller independent designers. So I think it was a very interesting mix of I guess, exhibitors there, and there was a theme generally around and sustainability at this event. And yes, as you say, I did have the opportunity to speak on stage as part of that. And I really sort of, I guess, always, as I tend to do, introducing the circular economy for those who may be not so familiar with it. This idea that it's trying to take our linear economy from take, make, use, waste, and sort of cycle a lot of those products and materials in use. And so I guess the key message is really that circular economy. It's all about maintaining value. And recycling is certainly a key part of the circular economy, but it's so much more than that. It's around, reuse, working on ways to sort of, keep our products in use long before we even go to recycling. So, making sure we can easily repair those products, even down to remanufacturing long before we get to recycling. And also about the business models that really support those sort of, I guess, initiatives. So yeah, it was always great to be on stage and share some of these messages around the circular economy. And yeah, it was certainly warmly received up there in Hebei, which was great.
Beautiful. Yeah, we'll definitely touch up on a few very connected topics a bit later. I mean, we're definitely going to talk about things like the battery passport and how, for example, traceability plays also an important role in making this circular economy actionable and not just a concept. But let me just give you a quick run what we want to cover today. So we have prepared 3 topics for discussion that we're going to take apart in some depths, and at the end of the podcast, you will be up to speed on the most important trends and disruptions considering the sustainability dimensions in business in the East and West and between the 2 geographies. So the first topic we want to cover is sustainability regulations between the East and West and what has developed in this area and what is currently pressing. The second is the relationship between AI and sustainability and how can AI help tackle the issues or broader sustainability development goals, and what is the connection between sustainability and AI, and can we maybe connect those 2 mega trends in order to move forward in both directions and help one push the other. And the third topic is how do startups solve the 17 SDGs in particular. So we look at 7 cases here where sustainability development goals are addressed through different levers. Most of those startups we looked at are specifically looking at AI in connection to sustainability, connecting to the second topic, and we are looking at those prominent examples, 4 in the West, 1 in the Middle East from Israel, and 3 in China. And we want to compare their approaches to the SDGs. So let's start off with the first topic.
Yeah, this is an interesting one that's just recently been unveiled by the EU. So essentially, as the EU is looking to implement an emissions trading scheme, of course, that's naturally going to make manufacturing, or can make manufacturing in the EU slightly more expensive. And obviously, of course, manufacturers in the EU are going to then be, I guess, incentivized to reduce the carbon footprint of their products. So the CBAM, or the cross-border adjustment mechanism, what that does is creates a fair market within the EU by putting essentially an import tariff onto products and materials that are manufactured outside the EU, also based on their carbon footprint, equivalent to that carbon price paid inside the EU for EU manufacturers. So then I think this is it's good because it obviously increases the competitiveness of the manufacturing still in the European Union. But what I think it's also going to do is help, I guess, incentivize manufacturers outside that, such as here in China or in other parts of the world, to really address the carbon emissions from their manufacturing processes. It's a very interesting step, and I think it's a very positive one to help, firstly, make sure that parts of the world that do have emissions trading schemes aren't put at a disadvantage, which I think is one of the arguments that always gets brought up against some of those emissions trading schemes, while also contributing to having such a more positive impact on the environment and reducing the impact by manufacturing of various products. I think it's certainly a positive step.
Is it basically the same principle as carbon points trading? Is that still the same principle or something else?
I think there is a distinction between some of those emissions trading schemes and the CBAM, and I think the CBAM is more to equalize manufacturing from outside areas that have an ETS in place. Just to make sure that when the ETS is implemented throughout the EU, that manufacturing there doesn't lose its competitiveness. So I think it's a very good way of balancing the positive effects of the ETS within the EU, while also ensuring that products that are made outside that aren't advantaged by not being a part of that emissions trading scheme. But yes, I think obviously it does encourage manufacturers outside the EU to also reduce their carbon footprints. But I think it's not something that will allow trading of those carbon credits unless they're already part of a different emissions trading scheme. I think certainly an ETS is something that has been trialled here in China, but hasn't been rolled out yet across the whole country. I think there's been a couple of provinces that have been running pilot trading schemes for carbon and emissions, but that's not something that has been rolled out fully yet. Let's use the car as an example. If a car produced in Germany, for example, because of the emissions trading scheme in Europe, the manufacturer of that car has to pay, let's say €5,000 in emissions trading. It's a number completely out of thin air. I'd have to check what those sort of ETS rates are in Europe. Then a car manufactured in China where there isn't an ETS is obviously at an advantage because they don't have to pay that €5,000 for emissions. So if that car manufactured in China is to be imported into Europe, that's where that cross-border adjustment mechanism comes in, and that imported car also has a tariff of €5,000 placed on it because it's the equivalent of that car manufactured within the EU. It's essentially just a way of equalising the playing field, making sure that manufacturing in EU does stay competitive to other parts of the world where there isn't this emissions trading scheme in place. But of course, then if the manufacturer in China can reduce those emissions, that also is going to be of benefit because it will reduce that amount of tariff that is applied when that vehicle is imported into the EU.
So it basically equals the playing field, but doesn't give an inherent advantage to European companies because basically now companies are treated equal, but there's not we know in China there have been a lot of initiatives for especially the battery industry that gave them unfair advantage, that tilt the playing field, but there's more an initiative to equalize the playing field, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, it's definitely a very positive step for the EU to do this, to support manufacturing within the EU, and especially some of that high tech manufacturing. Coming from Australia, where we don't have very much manufacturing at all due to a wide variety of reasons, But, there's always the argument against implementing some of these sort of systems in somewhere like Australia is it would disadvantage Australian producers. So I think this is a way of being able to implement that emissions trading scheme and create that positive impact while still making sure that manufacturers aren't disadvantaged.
Definitely. Yeah. This is something that has been very, very in line with what has been tackled on the Battery Day, that they really talk about tracing the battery and then being able to understand the transparency better, and then basically also have a more fair competition between onshoring and global sourcing, and understanding the true cost of global sourcing. If you look at the total cost of ownership of the end battery, we see that the battery passport will really help makes this more stringent, and hopefully also then reduce the critique in electric vehicle batteries, because you would basically also have the long-standing critique that batteries are actually not that sustainable because the production process is not transparent, and now we can counteract that in the same time push basically for more greener production in the upstream of the supply chain, where there has been nothing in check at the moment. And so there's an incentive for those companies to actually compete on this dimension as well. And I think it's a good way forward, and there's where digitalization really ties in with sustainability.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that that global battery passport, I think, especially within the EU, is also going to enable a lot more recycling of EV batteries, which is going to become more and more important as that number of EVs grows. And so it allows us to reuse some of those critical raw materials that are within those batteries. It gives us more of a picture within each battery, what materials are inside it, who manufactured it, and also the condition of that battery, how many times it's been charged and discharged. So I think it allows a lot safer recycling of some of those materials, which is, of course, an important part of the circular economy.
I was thinking what your impression is on how well China tracks Scope 3 emissions across the value chain. So anything that's not directly produced by the company itself, when talking about these kind of tracking tools, and taking it one step further, not too limited on batteries, but looking at sustainability also from the CO2 emissions angle. Have you come across any insights in this regard? Because speaking of, we can speak about SDG, we can speak about ESG. I know we have some SDG topics prepared for today. China is more focused at the moment, is more focused on ESG topics and ESG reporting. But it's also being criticized sometimes that China is greenwashing some of the areas. I think that's actually also happening in Europe. It's also happening in the US, that companies tend towards greenwashing some of their numbers to comply to ESG standards. Now, when talking about CO2 emissions, how advanced is China compared to Europe and the US tracking down these Scope 3 emissions that go so much beyond what the company's emissions are, and really taking into account all parts of the value chain?
Some SDGs have a direct trade-off with some other SDGs. So pushing one SDG forward diminishes another SDG. So you really have to see how you can tackle multiple SDGs at one time, basically kill two flies with one racket. And on the other hand, to see how to manage those trade-offs between SDGs. And by China going more in the direction of ESGs, they can have a more narrow focus and less trade-offs here. And going above and beyond is a question how it's valued by customers. Many companies really just do it more for the profit, and only would go that step if it's valued by the customers. And at the moment, I think the Western end consumer is more conscious. So we have a more push from the consumer side in the West. And also we have, I think, probably one generation ahead of university education that is more focused on sustainable strategies.
I think there's maybe a difference in perceiving sustainability and how you want to push this topic as a country and as a people when comparing the European approach versus the Chinese approach, but I'm not sure if you agree there. Like what I've investigated or I've experienced here is that China puts growth first. Economic growth is always first. And whenever sustainability topics and sustainability targets align with this big target or aim of growth, national growth, economic growth, it's welcome. It's already implemented in processes, in companies, economic reports, etc. Whenever it's easy to integrate these two dimensions, they really push forward, and they're sometimes even a lot more advanced than we are. Whenever it doesn't align with the growth targets, it's second priority, and it's actually reserved, you could say, reserved for later. And while we in the EU, that's my impression, tend towards really pushing sustainability, the topic by itself, and sometimes compromising on economic growth targets because we really want to push that sustainability topic further.
No, I mean, I agree with that. I think, certainly as we're coming out of the pandemic and the economy here in China has been relatively flat this sort of past 12 months, even though we are starting to see signs of recovery. But yeah, absolutely. I think, most companies around China have just been in survival mode over this pandemic period. And so it's sort of only now they're starting to sort of reset and look what their sort of future goals are. And I'm hoping that sustainability and some of this carbon reduction is going to be part of that. And I think also in China, there's also the 2060 carbon neutral goal, but I'm feeling that a lot of companies are thinking that this is, it's an important goal, but, 2060 is still quite a way away. And, they're more focused on sort of the day-to-day important things rather than some of those more long-term targets. So I think it's definitely going to have to come down to more and more government regulation just to, encourage companies to sort of green their supply chains here in China, and as they do here, it's of course going to have some positive flow-on effects for businesses around the world that use China for their their manufacturing and their supply chains. Having said that, just a couple of days ago, there was an article which came out saying that China's carbon emissions are looking for a structural decline from next year as the huge investment in renewable energy is continuing. And by now, the new renewable energies that is coming online is not just covering the expansion of energy required, it's in excess of that, which is going to allow China to start to finally wean itself off coal and some of these other dirtier forms of power.
Yeah, and I think it also shows that the Chinese government has been great at setting the right targets to incentivize a technological approach towards solving climate challenges, while we sometimes tend to look at how we can solve certain sustainability challenges with the things we have in place already, whereas China tries to invent new technologies and really push that from a technological angle to really rethink and reinvent, and also maybe set itself higher targets in a long-term perspective rather than we setting lower targets in a short-term perspective. It's something that I've encountered where investigating the sustainability space here.
No, absolutely. And I think, it's going back to our EV topic, even though I don't want to dwell on it too much, but the fact that, here in Shanghai, it's incredibly expensive to buy a license plate for a new car. And yet the local government, to buy a license plate for an electric vehicle is so much cheaper. And so that, obviously spurred a huge uptake in EVs, certainly here in Shanghai and other larger tier one cities. But that obviously just spurs on the electric vehicle industry here in China. And so that those sort of government policies help to lead, or have helped to lead, I should say, China to being, one of the leaders in EV technology. And I think similar to solar panels and wind turbines, just having that government support has led to China being a leader in some of those industries, which is great from an environmental point of view. But, of course, the Chinese government also has these sort of other, maybe slightly more geopolitical, motivations for some of these plans as well. But, it does have both of those, impact.
I'm not sure if China really has higher, or the EU or the West has lower goals. Especially in the EU, we have zero emission in 2050. In China, we have 2060. So I mean, I would argue that the EU basically has the luxury to have this more ambitious goals, obviously, because they are a developed country. China, we have a different weight on what should happen. So basically, the development and growth is one of the main concerns for politicians there, especially as they want to manifest the middle class, which is still a challenge for them, especially with a huge population. So I think it's tackled a bit different in the East and West, and a very good angle on that. Currently, also coming from research, is a societal license to operate theory, where you basically understand to which degree, as those, coming back to the Scope 3 emissions, are those manifested, and it really depends on the society where you operate in. And if the society pushes for those extra mile from companies, and basically deducts or takes away the societal license for a company to operate, even though it's not manifested by direct policies, the companies are still they're still interested in fulfilling that extra mile in order to fulfill the customer. And of course, apart from this, you have other dimensions from companies doing it voluntarily because they believe in a mission and a vision. And but definitely depends on also what society has been through and what stage of development the whole society is and what scope of society we talk.
There was one interesting talk that I had with an entrepreneur here in Shanghai, and he said what he discovered is that while developed nations usually tend towards working with their multinationals or the big corporates on solving certain challenges, like politicians asking their big corporates to help them like push forward in certain areas. China tends toward working more with their entrepreneurial basis, because they're still on a journey and because they know that future technologies play such a big role in their future growth. So I found that particularly interesting because it shows and also relates us back to what we discussed earlier, that while we set all these regulations and put all these regulations in place to actually help the big ones and let's say the traditional industry sectors to become more sustainable, and we focus a lot on that, while sometimes forgetting a bit that we also have these great entrepreneurs that have the capacity to also rethink certain areas from a bottom up with completely new concepts. China has that is China's first priority, and then the corporate world or the traditional industries are what China puts second. And this is, I think, interesting, just an interesting observation, because I had never really thought about that, but this entrepreneur made me think about it for the first time. It's really where the government, which kind of group of people the government first asks to give feedback for when putting these strategies in place.
And I think that also dovetails into the China's common prosperity plans and strategies, but I think that's probably an entire podcast topic on its own.
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah. So, the second topic we would like to address is the relationship between AI and sustainability, and how can AI help tackle the issues, or even broader SDGs, and what is the connection between sustainability and AI. And I think the understanding in the West and East is very different here. Especially coming from Germany, we sometimes see AI and also data sharing and more as a threat, and we don't see the direct connection between AI and sustainability. I think it's a bit more open in the US, obviously, because they are more entrepreneurial in nature, having the most venture capital activity in the world. And also having the biggest tickets there. And so definitely you can't put all the West in one bucket. But it's interesting also how China sees it. They have this race with the US towards AI leadership. Obviously, the US is leading at the moment. OpenAI is a US company. And we see China behind. But the US is looking over its shoulder and seeing China coming. And it's interesting that in the 2030 strategy from China, AI is basically understood as a general purpose technology. So something that is should enable the whole population to sustain the growth. So AI is seen as a basic pillar, and not just as something new that you have to be afraid of, but they really see it as a everyday purpose technology, and that is something that is a very different view from many people in the West, and very very different from basically uncertainty avoidance, but more like really jumping in that uncertainty and being just like, well, let's just do it with AI, and we see what it can do. So I think there are possibilities, even though sometimes you don't really see them, where sustainability and AI can interlink. And it's not that you have two megatrends that are completely separate from each other, but I think those megatrends, they have basically synergy effects as well. And I think we can see here that AI can then also bring forward sustainability with some startups that we will discuss in a few minutes. But generally, we have to be aware of that those statement of AI as a general purpose technology is very powerful. We've seen what China's policy directions can do. We have seen it with edtech startups, all investments being basically worthless overnight, and now giving this confidence to the AI direction that companies and also investors will push in this direction, and maybe also connect to sustainability.
As you sort of touched on, that optimization side, I think, is where AI is such an incredibly strong tool to be able to make sure that things are running most efficiently. Obviously, the efficiency is a key part of sustainability in the circular economy more broadly. And especially as we're having our future electricity grids with a lot of renewable energies. Of course, we're all aware that renewable energy can be intermittent in terms of, obviously the sun's not shining overnight, and also wind can be a bit more intermittent. So, using AI to be able to more efficiently bring online storage and then equally put that storage back into the grid as needed, I think is going to be incredibly important. And not just renewable energies, but soon, when we have a lot higher uptake of EVs, the EV charging overnight is, of course, also going to create a lot of demand on the grid at certain times of the day. Then, as we drive our EVs to the office, maybe we plug our EVs in. They get charged up with renewable energy during the day. We drive them home and then plug them back into the grid, where those EV batteries can also be used to help balance demand, balance supply peaks. Make sure that the grid is staying online, doesn't get overloaded in certain sections.
One thing I'd like to add is that AI has a faster response rate. So for some things to realize for us and analyze it, it just takes more time, takes months. AI can be almost instant in realizing, for example, okay, there's too much, let's say, pollutants being produced during the manufacturing process. So we correct that automatically. And I also can see basically in the forecasting, for example, things that it probably takes the human forecasting team a longer time to see, okay, we have made a forecasting error where there has been a certain bullwhip effect with the supply chain, and now we have the shortage. AI can better correct on those shortages instantly and realize it. We see it. A strange example from AI is also coming now from smart weapon systems, where those weapon systems make decisions that are quicker than the human team would able to anticipate. So those things are basically automated, and the decisions are made on basically AI algorithms. And those things can, in my opinion, also be implemented in the sustainability branch of having more automated decision in forecasting, in optimization of processes, and anti-polluting, real-time detection of pollution. And this can also maybe monitor cities' pollution score, and then adapt basically what happens at what time. So let's look at our cases and how practical cases actually use AI to tackle sustainability. I think the first one is Circulor, and Circulor is a London-based supply chain startup that focuses on the traceability of the circular economy, and that has been especially applicable also for batteries, where they try now to implement what has been preached by the battery passport by basically selling a solution for traceability and making this as a software service for companies to implement. They tackle then industry and innovation infrastructure, sustainable cities and communities by being able to get this tracing technology into the industry. And the second one is Winnow. Maybe one of you guys can say something to that.
Yeah, Winnow was one that I found in my research maybe a few months now across another couple of projects. But essentially, it's a smart waste bin for restaurants. So it has like a scale in the bottom of the waste bin, so it can measure the weight of the waste. But it also has a smart camera on top looking into the waste bin. So as chefs put their food waste into the bin, it can use machine learning, of course, backed by AI, to really understand what are being put into this food waste. So whether it's specific vegetables, ingredients, and once it has that weight and the amount of each of those waste streams that are being put into this bin by the chefs, it can then determine the monetary cost. So I think it's a very good way for restaurants to be able to sort of understand what they are putting into their waste bins, what ingredients, vegetables, and then sort of analyze that. Are they over ordering specific things? Are we, is there less demand than we expected from our customers for some of these, meals or ingredients or whatever that might be, and really help them to, cut down on that food waste. And of course, there's a monetary saving as well, which this system helps those restaurants be able to achieve.
And you're basically saying, is it also involvement of machine learning that basically the algorithm improves and by what it has seen before?
Yeah, absolutely. I think, some of those things where, it's a specific vegetable, is quite easy for it to identify, but it does need, a little bit of training to understand, I think more like prepared meals to, understand what are materials, what ingredients are in those meals.
Yeah, I think that's quite powerful. The third one would be Refibert. I'm now moving to the US. And we see Refibert uses a patent-pending AI and robotics-based recycling system to accurately sort textiles by material, including how to separate fabric blends. And the mission is here based on the material and color of each sorted section of textile waste. We send the processed waste to the recycler that can preserve most of the material. So AI is basically helping the humans here to do a better job at sorting. If you ever worked in like a sorting, probably conveyor belt, it is very straining to actually do the correct sorting, especially when you're tired. And if it's done by humans, without AI augmentation, that will lead to many mistakes. And so AI can really help to identify the right sorting and helps this complex process and monotone process to be augmented by the technology.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, it goes to show the power of AI, because the statistic of, can't remember the exact numbers, but something like there was already enough clothing in the world to clothe the next 5 generations of humans. So I think, there is such an insane amount of waste coming from, the fashion industry, reused or, unwanted clothes, I should say, and especially with, fast fashion business models with clothes that get discarded over after just a couple of wears. So I think, some of these systems incredibly powerful in being able to actually tackle those waste streams and recycle the materials into something, rather than just all this waste being shipped to Africa and burnt, which is what happens to a lot of the sort of waste clothing at the moment.
That's a very powerful mission, and I think that is something where we need augmentation. I mean, especially if you're looking at the SDG goals and we look at payments and no poverty, those jobs basically are very close to the poverty level, and reducing those jobs and freeing up people to do more meaningful jobs and also better paying jobs will elevate them from poverty, and also maybe providing better education in line with AI will help in this direction. So people are able to leverage AI to be more productive. And I think that could also elevate them away from poverty and hunger, and that could benefit the whole humanity. The next or the last one in the West that we see here is Eugenie AI, and that's an emission intelligent platform designed to help manufacturers that work in the metal and mining, oil and gas industries decarbonize their operations. The Eugenie AI software as a software as a service combines data from satellite images with machine learning and process data to provide a comprehensive overview of operations. And the AI then analyzes this data to help companies track, trace, and reduce emissions by 20 to 30%. And their goal is to help companies achieve higher environmental regulation compliance with accelerated sustainable growth while improving their bottom line. An interesting study of one of my old professors from the Kuhn Logistics University also found at the moment that AI does better jobs than most managers at the general level. The same basically comes to play here, that AI can better manage what is necessary to make the waste reduction. And I think I'm not sure where it was. I think it was it was in Canada, where one company has the first AI CEO that basically has an AI as a CEO. They don't have a human CEO anymore, and AI makes all the decisions. I mean, we don't want to go that far, but I think for those specific processes, having an AI monitor and control and make the decisions for waste reductions can be powerful. That was covering the West. Yeah. Moving on to the Middle East, I think we have a very interesting startup here that's called AgroScout, and that's in Jiron, Israel, was founded, and is focused on the growing impact of climate change that could further cut crop yields, and especially in the world's most food insecure regions. And their food systems are responsible for about 30% of greenhouse gas emissions. And the Israeli startup AgroScout envisions a world where food is grown in a more sustainable way. And their platform uses AI to monitor crop development in real time, to more accurately plan processing and manufacturing operations across regions, crops, and growers. And basically, this helps them minimize the environmental damage caused by traditional agrochemicals, making a positive contribution towards the sustainable agriculture practices. And with support from Google for startup accelerators, AgroScout has taken 1.4 million images across 145 acres and total of 20 countries. So they're basically able to reduce chemical there and being able to better understand the crops through AI, which is also a very interesting approach to using AI in connection to sustainability.
Yeah, and I think go ahead.
Sorry, you go for it. So I found this one very interesting because I, in May, visited Tencent in China. Yeah. And so making the comparison between China and West, or between the different geographies that we are looking at, it was interesting to see that Tencent, as one of the big tech giants in China, is also working on this topic. So that they had a big installation in their showroom with exactly the same thing, which I found interesting. So because obviously not only this, it's companies are working on this topic from the startup angle, but also big tech giants. And I would also include probably Google and the big tech giants in the US working on the same thing. So food seems to be one of the big future topics, agricultural AI as well. So where I would assume that the big tech giants are mainly focusing on providing the brain and the AI intelligence to solve these topics and to provide a platform for startups working on certain solutions to work on. So, but to train their algorithms on these topics, they're already doing some own research, which I just wanted to share because I think it also just underlines the importance of this segment.
Yeah, and I was just going to touch on the fact that, you can see that a lot of these sort of innovations come from areas where they're sort of low on resources, like growing food in the Middle East, where you have such a hot climate and such, small amounts of fresh water. I think that's where a lot of these sort of innovations, become incredibly important, just to make sure that whatever resources you do have are used in the most absolutely efficient way possible to get the maximum sort of yield for crops in this case. So,
yeah, absolutely. I mean, we covered now going from the digital twin, from the traceability in the battery passport, from circular to understanding patterns in food growth better through AI, and also understanding how much of each vegetable or each food raw material is can be used and where it's not used efficiently. Comparing that now to the East, I think we also have three very interesting startups here. I mean, I had experiences more by myself when I when I was studying in Shanghai. And then back in the day, Mobike was basically a company that is a bike sharing service before the electrification of bikes. We have like manually pedaling bikes, and they were all over the city. I mean, they caused some other issues of being on the footpaths all the time. And
maybe a little bit less on the AI topic for Mobike, but I think it's a very interesting case study in the differences between East and West. And I think Chinese entrepreneurs, especially, they certainly seem to be a lot less afraid of failure than we might be sometimes in the West, and just like coming up with new ideas and just like testing them as quickly as possible. And I think this is a classic example where there were a number of competing bikes sort of share systems that sort of emerged at a similar time, and powered by huge amounts of venture capital funding, the streets just got absolutely flooded with these share bikes. And sort of as you touched on, I think this boom really came before authorities really had a chance to react. And now it's a lot better regulated in terms of where you can and can't park the bikes. It's a lot better managed. And I think, of course, it's such a positive thing to encourage people to ride bikes. I think as China modernized and the population went from, the times when no one could afford a car, so everyone had to ride a bike out of necessity, through to a point now where you have so many cars on Chinese streets. I think these hire bike systems made bike riding cool again, which of course is a much more sustainable way of traveling, especially that last mile from a metro station to wherever it is your destination is. So yeah, and I think it also was sort of enabled by sort of the Internet of Things and obviously the smartphone revolution to enable that dockless sharing system. So I think it's sort of a combination of a number of trends, but yeah, as I sort of touched on, I think it's a very Chinese way of doing things, of just making it happen, throwing a lot of money at it to sort of experiment and iterate as you go, and then sort of figure out or sort of iron out the kinks as you go. So I think it's a very interesting case study in both sort of sustainable startups, but also the differences between Chinese startups versus Western approaches.
Yeah, and I think AI enables Mobike also to find optimal locations for placing their bikes.
Yeah.
This is now.
Yeah, more recently.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think more recently as they've grown.
Forecasting, right?
Yeah, over the last few years, obviously they've got so much more data now, based on where those those hotspots are for demand. And yeah, Betty, I think as you touched on, using AI to forecast the demand, where those bikes should be at certain times of the day.
Yeah, and then there's one more level to it, that most of these bike sharing platforms in China also integrated then again with Alipay or WeChat. So integrated in a broader AI environment where they are not only seen as a single solution as like bike sharing, but more as one component of a smart city solution, integrating several steps. And I think we're not seeing the end of the development yet. There's like gamification approaches implemented to give the user incentives to hop from one transportation mode to the other seamlessly. And like obviously, as you said, Tim, they are learning with the more that people use the services. And I'm sure that WeChat and Alipay are like collecting this data to make more out of it than what we currently see. And this takes us to this, what we discussed earlier too, the three of us, this like a smart city brain that the big ones in China are building, like Tencent, Alibaba, they're all working on these like big, like you could say smart city brains, obviously like crawling data from different solutions and feeding the AI systems with it. So I think this is also very interesting when looking at how China tackles these. At the first sight, not so much AI-related sustainable solutions, but on the second view, they have a lot of AI potential that is already being used.
So you're saying Mobike also maybe as a feeder platform for data. So basically gathering data. When do people take the bike as a transportation mode? How can this basically balance traffic demand and then tie into the smart city?
I'm not so sure about Mobike, but then Alibaba, for example, they have their own bike sharing service. So I'm sure that Alibaba is at least taking their own bike sharing data to the next level, and that might actually leading, but that's just a guess, that might lead to outcompeting Mobike in the long run. But we will need to wait and see. It's just interesting that like sometimes these bigger tech giants, if they integrate such solutions and maybe buy startups that have developed the solutions, they have the potential to do much more with the data. And this obviously also happens in the US and also in Europe, but at least in China, it's sometimes going very fast and also sometimes like being taken to the next level.
Right.
What we sometimes forget when looking at these topics is that the Chinese government also has an interest in educating the people, the Chinese people in certain areas, and actually gamification as a tool towards educating people is already used, especially in these bike sharing services. So people are getting credits sometimes for using certain transportation. That's then integrating in certain benefits or leading to certain benefits for people. And this is not only happening in like this area, but also in other areas that are important for China. And this is what I see, which is maybe working a bit differently over here because data privacy is tackled a bit differently here too.
So we have Metastar and No Carbon. Metastar is deeply engaged in vertical segments such as new energy, power grid, power plant, water conservation, and hydropower, oil, natural gas, chemical, and coal. And Metastar has independent core technologies and builds a meta-universe digital twin to help operations be more efficient. And so I think this is a pendant to what we have seen before in one of our cases from the West, and they're doing something very similar of optimizing the production, but they especially go in the direction of keeping everything digital. And so I think for many production companies, having a digital twin of the production process is a way to go and a way to also effectively monitor what's going on, and to basically produce everything digitally that is produced physically. And I think it's interesting that we see that now taking being the status quo, and I think that is also a good step forward. Whereas we've seen a few years ago, when we talk about digital twin, companies were just like, I have my Excel sheet, I don't know what to do. And now companies are pushing that. Startups are coming in, and this is basically software is sold as a package to also the bigger companies, and the bigger companies then profit from being able to use that as a general purpose technology. And I will just read out the last one here. The last one is No Carbon, and No Carbon is a technology company focusing on carbon neutralization. It is committed to providing one-stop carbon services based on carbon accounting and blockchain for the carbon account and carbon audit and carbon assessment management. And interesting here is that No Carbon has two products. One of them is the Carbon Pet, which is more geared towards individuals to reduce carbon emissions, and basically goes in a carbon savings account that then benefits the community. They basically can have a little app there where we can say, okay, to which degree can we cultivate carbon points? And for firms, basically, this is a bit of a bigger scale, and it's called the Carbon Treasure. And for the supervision of the AI technology, the audit of those carbon emissions is augmented compared to a manual audit. And this helps companies really be able to be more transparent and automate those audits that would take a lot of time usually. So it's basically a firm implementation software for carbon reduction.
And maybe I have one example to add because I'm really passionate about this startup. It's also a Chinese startup. It's called Neptune Robotics. And what they do is they developed a ship cleaning robot, which removes the microorganisms that build underwater on the ship hulls and then cause biofouling processes, which ultimately leads to increased carbon emissions. So what they do, they have a fully autonomous robot cleaning the ship hull, also making sure that the coating doesn't take damage from these biofouling processes. So what they do is like two things. They prolong the life cycle of the ship, which is good for our climate, and which goes into the direction of waste reduction. And then they also reduce carbon emissions, obviously also costs for the ship owners, and also they decrease the fuel consumption of the ships. It's interesting because this is like a technology. The ship cleaning robots is nothing that is completely new, but they are taking it to a very autonomous level, and they are also implementing predictive maintenance and AI, obviously, to do forecasting. And they might be going as far as actually analyzing the microorganisms and what they actually take from the ship hulls, and might actually be taking this into prediction models where these like microorganisms originally came from and how this is changing the environment and our ecosystems below water, which I find very interesting because it has a very broad dimension in a global scale. And I think that's also a good example to see that sometimes at the first sight, it's not necessarily a sustainability or climate tech solution, but it has a broad climate impact. And I think it's good, coming back to our topic, that we started thinking about more how to implement these climate tech or sustainability or circular economy approaches into our business models, because there's so much potential.
I mean, we have here SDG goal 14, life below water, addressed by that directly, and I mean also then waste reduction and basically sustainable communities of SDG goal 11, and I think this is a very interesting startup. What I see here, that they adjust probably the cleaning depending on what they learn basically by their what they've cleaned, and basically feed that in the AI system and optimize what materials or what cleaning robots should use, and what maybe chemicals are needed to be more efficient and less wasteful for that. And also more time efficient, and then also prevention. When we talk about the ecosystem, why does this problem occur to the ships that are cleaned underwater? How can this be prevented? How can this be maybe done that also less animals are harmed at first? And how can this this ecosystem function better in a future that's more in the direction of a green paradise, and less of just a destructive interaction between each other, us and the environment, and then basically seeing what we can fix afterwards. So prevention is definitely a big word here as well.
It's a graduate team from Hong Kong University, and they founded the startup in Shenzhen, so in South China. And they have also like big Chinese investors on board, like Sequoia Capital China and Matrix Partners, also SOSV, which is an American VC, early stage VC. And they've raised 17.5 million in their Series A funding round, which is comparatively big, so early. So it's still very early stage, conducting their pilot projects all across China, but already also collaborating with the New Zealand government on their regulations, because New Zealand is imposing strict regulations for the incoming cargo ships, which are checked on their the state of the ship hull, because obviously New Zealand is very cautious when it comes to their like ecosystem and nature reserves. So they check quite intensively when on anything coming into their country.
And those robots are basically then released underwater and do the cleaning autonomously, or are they piloted by humans?
They are basically operating completely autonomously. So when the cargo ship is loaded or unloaded and is parked in the harbor, the robot is attached to the ship hull, and then it conducts the cleaning tasks automatically and fully autonomously. And then while the system analyzes the data and also the incoming material,
like little research robots, thousands of research robots down there cleaning and collecting data at the same time. That's fascinating. Yeah. Really love the idea. Yeah. Very, very fascinating what the future has in hold for us.
Yeah, thank you very much. I think it was a great discussion today. Lots of topic we touched upon. Very great to have you on board and to have had you on board, Tim, again with all your expertise, especially on circular economy, with what you've seen in the last months, visiting several trade fairs and speaking to many people, also on the ground here.
Yeah, thank you. It's always an absolute pleasure to chat, and I'm sure we'll chat again sometime soon.